So if the swarm that calls itself James S.A. Corey writes a new book, I guess I have to talk about it. Cheers! Welcome back everybody to me talking about books, and one book in particular today, and that is The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey, the first book in the Captives' War series. Well, I have no idea how many of those will be. I have not checked, and I don't plan on. And we'll do the usual thing, which is I'll give you a quick synopsis and tell you why you should read it or why you maybe shouldn't read it, depending on how I feel about it. And then I'll have a bit of beer, and you go and read the book. It's not that long. You can do it. And when we talk about some themes, topics, and so forth, which include a lot of spoilers. So if you don't mind spoilers, you can totally go ahead with me immediately. Otherwise, go read the book. It came out last week. It's not too bad. It's not too long. You should have fun. So let's do that, right? All right. So James S.A. Corey, as you know, is, of course, the pen name of two authors, those being Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. Ty Frank being the former assistant of George R. Martin, and Daniel Abraham, the author of a number of fantasy series that I haven't read, and I know I should have, because a lot of people on BookTube love them, which makes it very difficult for me to actually read them. Anyway, they're out there. I've heard they're good. And they, of course, wrote together under this pen name, James S.A. Corey, a series, that being The Expanse, which was huge and, you know, got like a TV adaptation quickly. And it ended like 2 years ago, I think, with Leviathan Falls. And yeah, it certainly was probably the best-selling, biggest sort of hard sci-fi to space opera, whatever, classic sci-fi book series of the last decades, I assume, because I suspect someone as talented as Ian M. Banks never sold that many copies, and Alistair Reynolds, while also being brilliant, also never got like these levels of fame that James S.A. Corey got for all what they did. I have thoughts on The Expanse, which I will not tell you about here. I may reread the books and do like a detailed sort of conversation about it if anyone wants that. I don't necessarily have to. Anyway, let's talk about this one. This one is very different from The Expanse and still very similar. So, you still get science fiction. You get a more space operatic kind of level of science fiction. There's way more aliens and stuff in this one than in The Expanse, which basically was all just humans doing human stuff in space, most of the time at least. So that's the biggest difference. So if you want something that has a bit more of that Star Wars feel, with just like the universe being huge and truly aliens doing truly alien stuff, this is very much your thing. If you want like full-on hard sci-fi, like the first one or two books of the first part at least of the Expanse, yeah, this will be a change of pace for you. So that's like the first thing I wanted to talk about. It does have a lot of the same strengths that The Expanse has. It also has the same weaknesses that The Expanse has, which are, I think, a part of the deeper way of how James S.A. Corey look at the world and at their writing. So you get a group of characters that you kind of follow around, and you have these different perspectives. They're all like third-person limited. And they are uniquely drawn characters. They're very accessible characters in the same way that the crew of the Rosinante was in The Expanse. So this is a very, very readable, fast-paced book that you will get through very quickly if you're used to modern genre fiction writing. You have these characters, they're engaging, the plot moves very fast, there's enough action in there, there's enough weirdness in there to keep you just going, because there's always something happening, and you have the interpersonal drama or interpersonal relationship stuff that you also know from The Expanse, which, yeah, they are really good at. Like, James S.A. Corey are really good at writing these kind of stories, and if you liked The Expanse, and you don't mind having a far more alien, far more strange universe and as your backdrop for your setting and for your story, this will be a book for you. If you didn't like The Expanse for all kinds of reasons, and, you know, because, you know, you didn't like it, then this might also not be for you. If the only thing you just didn't like about The Expanse was its focus just on humans and too much realistic technology, and you want something more out there, more space operatic, go for this one. It does have the same writing, it does have the same strength, but it is a different universe. So that's sort of like my quick summary. start here. Let's talk about a quick synopsis. What is happening? We have humans on a planet, and this planet is not the Earth, but they're humans, and we follow this group of scientists, and this group of scientists ends up in a very different situation. Now, this I would not consider a spoiler because it's already explained on the back cover, but yeah, they encounter aliens that are far, far, far superior technology-wise and so forth, and they are basically captivated and then have to navigate their situation as, the prisoners of a vastly superior alien species. This is the basic plot. And then obviously, shit goes crazy, but this is part for the spoiler section. So if that kind of premise of humans encountering aliens for the first time and being completely overmatched by them sounds like a premise you might be interested in, yeah, go read this book. So these are the reasons. Go read this book if you liked The Expanse. Go read this book if you like modern science fiction with a more space operatic approach. If you like third-person limited characters, multiple characters with a lot of good human traits and a fast action story, this may be a book for you. If you want very deep philosophical explorations, this is not the book for you. If you so it's closer to like an Alistair Reynolds story, I guess, something like Pushing Ice, I guess, maybe, in a way. There are similarities, I would say, and far less like the culture novel in that regard. So these are the reasons why you should read or not read this book. I had fun, I enjoyed it, but I have some troubles with it, which is where we're going now. Well, you go read the book or decide that you don't need to read the book and listen to spoilers anyway, and I have a bit of a drink, and then we'll talk about the stuff. All right, so you're still here. I assume you've read the book or you don't mind spoilers. Let's talk about it. All right, so this will go through like several layers. I'll start with the main thing. I don't like competition stories, tournament stories. I don't like them necessarily in the Hunger Games. I have heard they are part of, stuff like Fourth Wing or whatever. Certainly, they seem to be a part of something like Red Rising. I have not read those books. I don't like stories that are all about competition. And this is, at its core, is very much that kind of story. With our group of humans finding themselves under their carracks and having to figure out that, yes, they are tested. That test is very much a fight for survival. It's very much that sort of like Darwinist sort of approach to everything, which is, I think, where we need to go with this and why I think this is a bit of a problem. I don't like those stories in general because I think they reduce human existence to a very specific, small part of what makes human existence interesting. And over-focusing on that just doesn't interest me that much. I think it can be damaging to exclude everything else from art than, these kind of things. So, yeah, that's a bit of a mark against it for me personally, but I think we'll have to look at this in some more detail because we obviously move forward with this, and the parallels to evolution are important here, and the Carricks being the uber species here, basically forcing people, other alien species into these competitions. They are basically playing interstellar eugenics, right? They are trying to, test all these different alien species against each other, and also slightly molding them into more useful people. And that is an interesting idea in general. There are several ways you can go with this, I think. And I guess my biggest problem with this book so far, and we'll come back to that at the end, is that it only sets up these things and then doesn't do anything with it, which I think is a bit of a problem that I already had with The Expanse, which also doesn't necessarily deliver on the potential that it has. So this is both a story about evolution and essential human nature, but it's also a story about like how much you can actually change. It's a nature versus nurture story in that regard, because that's basically what is happening here, and we'll see on which side it does come down. And I think that's partly my big issue with it. So it's an evolution story in that regard. It's a competition story. I like in general, I think the metaphor of having a competition as literally like a metaphor for Darwinism, for social Darwinism as well here. And this is, I think, where stuff gets problematic, right? Works really well if you do something interesting with it. So let's look at human nature. This comes up a lot because, of course, we have the idea of like people fighting, trying to die gloriously, which they don't at the end, or maybe they will in the future, with the idea that human nature is to fight, to be an apex predator, to do all of these things, and not go down without a fight, and not adapt to the domination by the Carricks and so forth. And that is certainly a bold statement about human nature. I'm not sure I agree with that, because it kind of goes very close to that whole like evo-psych nonsense that is very, very open, or like very beloved of people that then take it into like really problematic and dark places. Like social Darwinism is a terrible idea. Eugenics are a terrible idea. Now, obviously, this is not what this book does, but I think it presents this world, and while, yes, humans, being basically the victims of this idea of eugenics and social Darwinism here, does sort of make it clear that this is not a good system, but, and that you can read this as criticism. But I don't think it goes anywhere, because the idea that human nature is still just to fight and, become like the dominant species otherwise, I'm not sure if that's a good message either, because it does not necessarily question the underlying idea of the Carrick system. It just goes like, well, humans are not the boss animal in this system, so it sucks for humans. And you can go down that road, and I hope that like later books will go there. But for now, the idea of human nature is to be incredibly aggressive, to not give in to any like rules or whatever. Yeah, you can do an awful lot of like terrible stuff with this, and it's the sort of like the darker side of existentialist science fiction and fantasy and sword and sorcery that I think could become dangerous. So let's move on from this to something that I found good. Let's talk about, or good in part. Let's talk about representation. One of the things that made the Expanse so good, I think, and so successful at its time, was that it did have a lot of like inclusion and representation, mostly with ethnicities, but also sexuality and stuff like that. So that's something we see here as well. Obviously, there's, humans being not on Earth. Skin color is not necessarily mentioned that much. There's no racism in this world because apparently, there's hints at like conflicts between different countries, but there's no racism in this specific world. But we do have, obviously, representation of different sexualities. We have queer people in this world, which is good. And the fact that it's just like presented as normal is also good. Normalization is one of the important aspects of making this world less homophobic, so I like that. That is really good, and as I've said before, James S. A. Corey are really good at creating these characters. The other part, where we get some more representation in this book than we got in The Expanse, is of course mental health and neurodiversity. This book does deal a lot with this. I think if there's one main theme, so to speak, it is very much like how people with different brains, different minds, sort of react to pressure, react to the world in general. We have, obviously, one character with, at least depression, which, yeah, I would not call it perfect representation of depression from my personal experiences, but then all our experiences are individual and unique, so that's not so much the part, but like having a character struggling with finding medication and clinging to medication and other ways to sort of deal with the way they are just like differently wired than everyone else, that is good, because we need more characters like that. We need more stuff like that. And we have like different characters with different aspects, like Tonner Fries, the main, the leader of the group, is clearly, can be read at least, I would say, as someone somewhere on the autism spectrum. And, different characters in here do have varied, there is variation in their neurodiversity and general like mental health, and I think that's a very, very good thing. We of course also have a lot of like personal relations, like a brother and sister pair doing relying on each other. We have the sort of love triangle thing with Davin and Tonner and Else at the beginning, and the way they James S.A. Corey sort of like use that additional viewpoint of the swarm that first takes over Els and then takes over the brother whose name I already have forgotten, Jellin? I think Jellin is his name, yeah. That is an interesting aspect because it allows James S.A. Corey, it allows the authors to look at human nature from the outside and try to describe understanding human nature in a sort of like outside perspective, which the other like viewpoints, the third-person limited of the humans does not necessarily allow, and contrasting these to each other, I think, is a really helpful way of doing this and looking at mental and neurodiversity, and that's a very good thing. I also think it's something that would play really well in another adaptation. I think both The Expanse and this book, well, this book probably less so because of just the sheer amount of special effects you would need to create that world, are very adaptable because they conform very much to current narrative trends, the way we create stories in the 21st century, both on screen and on the page. And this, I think, I try to not blame people for writing popular fiction because I think that's stupid. And if this book works and if it speaks to a lot of people, then this is a great book. But there is a level of, I don't know, it's just too smooth for me, for my personal taste. And I don't know how to explain this. It's just a bit too conformist, just a bit too doing everything as I would expect someone, maybe that's just the issue of writing by committee, by writing with a partner in the way where you don't split up the POVs or whatever, right? Maybe that's just the point, but this feels just slightly too smooth for me, for my personal tastes. And I think that's something that maybe makes the mental health and neurodiversity representation, on the one hand, it makes it very successful because it's probably more accessible to a lot of people because it's just so easy to read. On the other hand, it does not actually go too deeply into the actual experiences of people with mental health issues or neurodiversity, because once you do that, you kind of leave that more polished place and polished style behind, because that shit's messy. And if there's one thing that James S.A. Corey avoids, it's messy storytelling and messy writing, I guess. So I think it doesn't go far enough on the one hand, but if you want to read it as, say, normalization in the same way that just having casual, like, homosexuality and so forth in these books is normalization, then yes, that's good. I'm just, like, slightly conflicted on it because of, personal backgrounds and stuff like that. So, let's go further. And I think this is, like, where this all sort of becomes sort of less than it could be for me. And that is, of course, the structural level. By which I mean, it doesn't address structural issues, systematic issues, right? Because at the end of the day, all the things happening in these books are driven forward by a very fast plot, and usually individual heroism, individual decisions, and so forth. It places a lot of weight on the individual choice, and that means that structures of power, structures of oppression that kind of influence all of us are usually mostly ignored. Now, that makes it easier storytelling, I agree, because it's much easier for us to just focus on individuals, blame individuals for their choices, and praise individuals for their choices. We like to be individuals, I get it. It makes it much better, much easier storytelling. But it also means that you kind of have to come down on the nature side in that nature versus nurture debate, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't address the fact that all of these people have grown up in specific circumstances that have turned them into who they are. No, you have just individuals with their individual problems, wishes, wills, and so forth, and they influence the universe because of that. And that's where I think the problem comes in with that larger setup of being forced through these competitions to evolve as a species, because, yeah, this is very much human nature winning over external pressures, which you may call nurture or structured education or other systematic oppression, and human nature will win. And that is a very strong position to take in a book that doesn't actually actively argue that, because it's too busy with piling on action scenes after action scenes. And I think I enjoyed reading this, I had a lot of fun with it, but it always made me kind of feel slightly queasy, because I'm like, this is highly entertaining and a lot of people will love this. But it slips in that that underlying message without ever actively stating it. And I'm not even sure if James S.A. Corey are as aware of what they're basically saying with that whole setup. Now, all of this can obviously change with future books when, you know, the humans are now trying to, you know, have moved up the next layer, the next step, and obviously there is still a goal of defeating the Carracks at one point in the future. It's the first book in a series. It can go into a lot of ways. I'm just not too hopeful it will go the whole distance, because it is, at the end of the day, too caught up with the things that James S.A. Corey are really good at, which is, you know, the interpersonal drama and the action and the lush world descriptions. And yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's probably too timid to take like actual positions and actual stands, which is probably a me thing. Now, these are my thoughts on The Mercy of Gods. So I had fun, but there's this bitter aftertaste, and I don't know what to say about it. Let me know what you thought when you read it, if you read it. What are your thoughts on it? Did you enjoy it? Yeah, let's have a conversation in the comments down there. Like, subscribe, do the things. There's a Patreon if you want to give me money. I really appreciate that, but you don't have to. Yeah, I'll see you in the next one. And until then, thanks and cheers.